Compassion, Expressing Fundamental Kindness. Lecture 15. Some of the noblest aspirations of the human heart include the ability to see wrong and try to right it, to see suffering and try to heal it, and to see war and try to stop it. These phrases also offer a precise description of the essence of compassion. For most of us, the skill to be compassionate toward difficult people comes at the end of a very long road. Mindfulness can guide you through working with the easier cases and help you gradually progress to the harder ones. Compassion versus pity. Compassion is the desire to alleviate suffering, or dukkha, to use the richer term. Compassion entails the courage to face dukkha. Dukkha is the term used for suffering. So compassion entails the courage to face dukkha, the wisdom to gaze into it deeply, and the resolve to respond to it in a way that brings relief. More than just a sentiment, compassion is born of a brave consciousness and a strong will. It may arise as tenderness in the heart, but it requires the support of a tough mind. Compassion is not pity, although the two are sometimes confused. Pity is simply feeling sorry for someone who has to endure suffering, but pity keeps its distance from suffering. Pity can't get past the element of fear. It's afraid of pain and suffering and wants to flee from their presence. Compassion doesn't keep its distance. It literally means to experience or endure with. Compassion is willing to be with suffering up close, because it has learned to accept rather than resist suffering. That's powerful. I have to read again. Compassion doesn't keep its distance. It literally means to experience or endure with. Compassion is willing to be with suffering up close, because it has learned to accept rather than resist suffering. Acceptance. Words are sometimes used to hide our discomfort with suffering. Sometimes we just don't know what to say. But it's better to keep quiet than to utter vacuous words. The compassionate person does not flee from pain or silence. Even without words, one can bring comfort to another by merely being physically present and mindfully attentive. Such gestures can strengthen others by conveying that it is possible neither to resist nor run away from suffering. The capacity for compassion is in our deepest nature as human beings. To be sure, some of us manifest the face of compassion more plainly than others. Many consider motherhood to be the prime exemplar of compassion. In the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, the word translated as compassion derives from the same root syllable from which the word for womb comes. In fact, the word for womb, Rahem, is itself occasionally translated as compassion. Both words are related etymologically to Ar-Rahman, meaning the exceedingly compassionate, one of the Quran's 99 most beautiful names for God. When we fail to act in a compassionate way, as we often do, we have either been conditioned to ignore suffering or we have suppressed the desire to relieve it. Our frequent failure to be compassionate does not mean that compassion is not a basic part of who we are. It simply means that our fundamental nature has been obscured and needs to be gently revealed. Much in our modern culture works to separate us from our basic compassion and hence alienates us from one another and from ourselves. Our love of competition, our fear of pain and suffering, our quest for pleasure, and our endless forms of distraction all function to enshroud compassion. As we continue with daily sitting practice, occasional body scans, walking meditation, and mindful eating, we subtly counteract those deadening aspects of our culture, whether we recognize it or not. Whether we recognize it or not, mindfulness practice quietly subverts those forces and gently eases their effects on us. The cultivation of compassion. Being able to see dukkha is the prerequisite to deeper compassion, but perceiving the deeper expressions of suffering isn't easy and requires the skills of attentiveness that mindfulness practice sharpens. Seeing the extensive and subtle nature of dukkha permits us to be more adept at identifying it and becoming more familiar with it. That familiarity, in turn, helps us to accept it as present moment experience, which we need not run from or resist. Compassion requires the willingness to look at suffering, tragedy, pain without aversion or attachment. Recognizing the subtle nature of dukkha also enables us to see how its clearly evident manifestations, such as war and conflict, are interrelated with its less apparent forms, such as greed, fear, and disappointment. Common to all experiences of dukkha are self-centered desires that often outstrip the capacity of reality to satisfy them. Insight into the conditions that give rise to suffering is necessary to being able to respond to that suffering constructively. Recognizing dukkha in our own experience is critical to seeing it in the lives of others. Unless you understand the nature of your own suffering, you can do little to help others with theirs. I'll read this again. Recognizing dukkha, which means suffering, recognizing dukkha, suffering, in our own experience is critical to seeing it in the lives of others. Unless you understand the nature of your own suffering, you can do little to help others with theirs. So first we must see suffering within ourselves and address it. Then we might be helpful to others, because only then we can see the suffering of other people. Then only then we can be there for them and assist them. Paradoxically, then, you can take your conditioned tendency to focus on you and use it to turn outward toward others in compassion. As we go further into our practice, however, we begin to see that is hardly a paradox at all, as we come to understand that There is not your suffering and the suffering of others. There is only suffering. Wow, that's very powerful. I'll read that again. Paradoxically, then, you can take your conditioned tendency to focus on you and use it to turn outward toward others in compassion. As we go further into our practice, however, we begin to see that this is hardly a paradox at all, as we come to understand that there is not your suffering and the suffering of others. There is only suffering. Compassion and empathy. Being compassionate toward others is based on empathy, or what the Buddha called putting yourself in the place of others. Knowing that you want to be happy and free from suffering, you can infer that other beings want this as well, and you can treat them accordingly. The first step in being compassionate toward others thus involves imaginatively entering into the interiority of another person, sharing his or her inner life in a profound way by recognizing that they are like you. The world's religions and philosophies almost uniformly endorse this empathetic precept and make it the cornerstone of their ethics. It is the basis of what we in the West call the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I always want to follow the Golden Rule all the time in my life. And may I follow it forever and be conscious about it. In East Asia, many follow the same principle as it was formulated by Confucius over 2,500 years ago. Never impose on others what you would not choose for yourself. If you do a little research, you might be surprised by how widely and frequently this simple idea is articulated in the world's wisdom traditions. Despite its ubiquity, most of us find it difficult to remember to be empathetic, which may be a clue as to why the principle is so repeatedly articulated in the traditions. It's not that empathy is particularly difficult for us. Sometimes it arises within us spontaneously, perhaps more than we ordinarily recognize, unless we are paying attention. Just as often, however, we neglect to practice empathy because the illusion of self gets in the way. That's very important. I will read it again. It's not that empathy is particularly difficult for us. Sometimes it arises within us spontaneously, perhaps more than we ordinarily recognize, unless we are paying attention. Just as often, however, we neglect to practice empathy because the illusion of self gets in the way. The illusion of self gets in the way. Your conditioned tendency to regard the universe as revolving around you makes it easy to forget that the rest of the world thinks the universe revolves around them. When you are so absorbed in seeking your own happiness by means of the usual frantic and misguided methods, you are too preoccupied to appreciate that others are seeking the same freedom from suffering that you are. If we can just look around at our world and at each other, taking some time to stop the futile climbing up and sliding down, we can see what a state we are really in. that awareness changes our whole attitude toward the world and toward each other. Yeah, that awareness changes our whole attitude toward the world and toward each other. It just reminded me something I just wanted to add. We all desire sex. We all want sexual experiences as a human. We all desire sex, most of us. But more than sex, what we really desire is intimacy. And intimacy is not equal to sex. Intimacy says, into me see, which means I profoundly see you, I profoundly feel how you feel, I profoundly understand how you think, and I profoundly understand what makes you happy, and I profoundly, deeply understand how I can touch in the deepest core of your essence. That is what intimacy is. Touching a person's core, touching a person's the deepest essence. And we can do this through the Tantra. And Tantra is, the tantric sex is about having conscious, aware intimacy, having conscious, aware sex, or putting awareness and consciousness into the sex, putting intimacy into the sex. And that's why awareness is so important. If we were to be aware in every part of our lives, if we were to be aware when we eat, if we were to be aware when we work, if we were to be aware when we engage with people, when we engage with animals, when we engage in the nature, with the trees, with the, all of the members of the nature, all of the members of the planet Earth, it will be way easier, way peaceful, way joyful, and way harmonious. That's why awareness strengthen the intimacy, awareness strengthen the trust, awareness strengthen the relationships. Awareness, it's so important. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. And yeah, we'll read it. I'll keep reading. Empathy in practice. When you are not feeling particularly empathetic with some of your fellow human beings, there is a simple practice to remind you of the common humanity we all share beneath the labels and identifications that divide us. Anytime you discover yourself being annoyed by or feeling alienated from someone, recite the words, just like me. If you are seeking an ideal location for testing your progress on the mindfulness path, there is no better place than an airport. If you are seeking an ideal location for testing your progress on the mindfulness path, there is no better place than an airport. Where else do you have such wonderful opportunities to experience the subtle manifestations of dukkha, to practice patience and anger management, to observe other people, and even to meditate? Let's say you find yourself waiting in one of the several airport queues you have to go through to get to where you are going. Just ahead of you, as you are rushing to get through security, is a bumbling passenger who has no clue how to negotiate this procedure expeditiously. As you watch the bumbling passenger, It is a perfect time to practice your skills of empathy. Say to yourself, just like me. Here is a person who forgot to empty his pockets. It is so easy to get flustered going through these stressful cues that I can understand how someone could overlook that step. Wow, that's so beautiful to practice just like me. Say just like me. Because we all been to such kind of situations, there are certain times that we don't know what to do, we don't understand how the procedure works, we feel so frustrated, we feel so stressful, we feel so maybe ignorant because we don't know, and when we don't know we feel shameful, and we feel so stupid at that moment, and so fearful and so anxious and so uncertain of what might comes our way. So yeah, it's so good to remind ourselves to say just like me. That's a very beautiful way to put it. You don't know what is ailing the pushy woman behind you or the slow man in front of you in line. What you do know is they are seeking happiness just like you. Wow, that's so beautiful. I'll read that again. You don't know what is ailing the pushy woman behind you or the slow man in front of you in line. What you do know is they are seeking happiness just like you, and probably doing so in the same misguided ways as you. Wow. It reminded me something that I done when I was younger. It's kind of make me feel sad right now. I remember I used to go to walk in the stadium with my mom, and because I was young and youthful and full of energy, so when I was walking so fast at that time. Now I'm totally different. When I was walking so fast, and my mom was walking so slow because my mom was old already. And when she gave birth to me, she was already old. And so by the time that I was maybe 14 or 15, I was in my teenager age, and my mom was already maybe 50, yeah. Or maybe she was maybe life wounded her so much that she didn't have the lifeness within her. She was not, as though her soul was dead, that her body was projecting that deadness to her body. Her soul was projecting that, or her higher self was projecting that deadness to her body, her human mundane body, and she was walking so slow. And that was so frustrating me, and I was so frustrated with her. I was shouting at her that she should walk faster, she's walking so slow. And she was doing her best to walk as fast as she can. But even the fastest version of her was still slow to me. And I was in my teenager age, 14 or maybe 13 or 14 years age. I remember my face was full of pimples, and I was full of stress because there's so much violence in my family, and so much. My hormones were so top of my head, and the family problems were making me so stressful, and my hormones on top of it making me even more stressful and frustrated and angry, and so much blood, so much youthful blood within my body that's circulating. I was always desiring the fast and, the quick all the time. Like when I want to eat quick. When I want to walk, I want to walk quick. When I do my homework, although when it comes to homework, it wasn't as quick. But I wanted to do everything so quick and fast. I had so much impatience. Like I was so impatient person. I was just so so horrible child to my mom during my teenage age. But before that, prior to my teenager age, I was really good daughter to my mom. After my teenager age, I was so frustrated with my dad, and I had not frustrated. I would say I was full of hatred, and full of resentment, and full of anger to life itself, and everyone in my life, everyone in my family, my dad, my mom, and everyone. And I was pushing my mom to walk faster, and my mom, like a poor woman, she was telling me that this is like I'm already walking as fast as I can. Like she was doing her best, but I was still complaining. I was still like kind of. I remember maybe I even pushed her from her behind to walk faster. And oh God, it's really breaking my heart to think about those times. Now I have compassion and empathy for her. And yeah, the sentence is so beautiful. It says, everyone is seeking happiness just like you. And everyone has pains. Everyone has traumas. Some people they are like they don't know how to express, because they are so repressed and they are so traumatized that they just do it through violence. And yeah, some people are way repressed that they are so silent, they don't have voice, especially if you are a lady in the Middle East. Of course, not every country is the same, but it depends on the family norms and the traditions. But my family, my mom and my sisters, and all of us, we were born in a very traditional society, and we were so repressed. We had to listen to our fathers and our brothers all the time, all the male figures. We didn't have voice, and we are mostly voiceless. We used to be. And and my father, already he passed away, and I forgive him, and I also pray for him. May he rest in peace. I think as a man, he was repressed also, and he didn't know how to articulate himself, and the only thing that he knew was violence. And so through violence, he was expressing himself. That was his way of expressing himself. Violent, being controlling, being oppressive to others, his family members. So, but eventually everyone is seeking happiness. Everyone, every being, every sentient seeking happiness, just like us, just like you and just like me. And so it's really requires us to have compassion and empathy to be able to profoundly see the core of their essence, see the core of their soul, what kind of suffering they had been going through, or what kind of suffering they had been, or what kind of pressure they had been under. It requires compassion. It requires empathy to be able to see and be aware of their own sufferings. Yeah. I mean, teenagers. I have some teenager students. One of my godson, he is now in his teenager age. He's now, I guess, almost 14 years old. He is now become so rebel and so rebel to his mom, and I always tell him to be always grateful to his mom, and to be always be kind to his mom, and treats her just like a god, because she created him, and God, just like God created us, God gave women such huge power to create. So we should be really able to appreciate our divine mothers. They are so precious. Although there are some mothers that they are unaware and they are unconscious, and they are causing so much suffering and torture and so much trauma to their kids, and they are, as I said, are unaware. They are unconscious. They don't really know what they are doing, and I feel so sad for them. Although I have to say that I feel so much resentment also towards them, but I had to say that, like, we have to see what kind of problem, what kind of suffering they had been going through in the past, which caused them to be like this. And that's why we all need some, we had to go through some psychiatrists and some psychologists. We all need some therapy. Everyone needs therapy. All of us needs therapy. And I'm so happy that my sister, she told me that she had been having some therapy recently. I felt so happy. I cannot express how much happy I felt for her. And I tell my mom that she also needs therapy, because my beautiful, compassionate, wonderful mom, she lost her husband, who, although he treated her horribly, but she still had a compassion. Even after his death, she still said that my dad also had a good side. She is a wonderful, very angelic person. And my brother passed away, and she felt a huge pain. I mean, losing your own son is a very, very huge pain. It's suffering. And but she is very powerful, and she still utilized that suffering, that pain, and utilize it, that pain, that suffering, towards those people who die in the war. And she pray for them. She cry for them and she pray for them all the time. And her compassion gives me tears. Like, her compassion. Yeah, everyone seeks happiness. Everyone. That's why we have to have compassion and empathy towards other people. Because everyone is just like us, just like me. Yeah, it's in fact, talking all these things really helping me. Also, it's like a therapy. I hope you don't mind, whoever listening me. But I don't really care, because I'm living for myself, and I'm happy that if someone can have compassion and empathy with me, I'll be so honored. And if not, I still and don't care, and I still wish happiness and peace and joy to every being. So I'll read it. I'll keep reading it. After a deep breath. Just like me is a versatile practice. It can be performed just about anywhere at any time. You can practice as you read about or watch events in the news, taking a moment to ponder why others behave the way they do, trying to imagine how you would react in a similar situation, reflecting on the ways we share a common humanity. Yeah, we share a common humanity. Just like me is extremely effective for establishing empathy with others, particularly those we find difficult to like. Empathy and compassion do not require what we feel affection for others. We can have compassion for our worst enemies. I read that again. We can have compassion for our worst enemies. I thought my dad was my worst enemy. My mom thought my dad was her worst enemy. But see, life changes us. My dad passed away in 2016, and I've forgiven him. And I can see why he was the way he was. I can see the suffering he had. He was difficult to like, but I can see the suffering he had. So I have compassion, and I have empathy, and I have forgiven him. Ultimately, the full pursuit of compassion practice requires that we cultivate empathy for some very tough characters, including those whom we know to be the perpetrators of horrendous violence and abuse. Compassion cannot be selective. That's very powerful. I have to read this again. Ultimately, the full pursuit of compassion practice requires that we cultivate empathy for some very tough characters, like Putin, the Russian President Putin. Very tough character. Including those whom we know to be the perpetrators of horrendous violence and abuse. Compassion cannot be selective. Just like the Putin, just like the Hitler. Although we know that they have done so horrendous violence in the world, but if they were not exist, we wouldn't evolve this far. Their existence also mattered. I don't say that what they did, I don't justify what they have done. I don't say that what they did was justifiable. I don't wish any harm to any being, regardless of the culture, the religion, the color, the race, the ethnicity. I don't really care. But we had to see that if they were not exist, maybe, perhaps we wouldn't evolve this far. We evolved, the human consciousness evolved in the face of danger, in the face of tragedy, in the face of fear and violence. We evolve way faster. We evolve exponentially. Those fears, those violence, those horrendous things accelerate our evolution of our consciousness. So we have to have compassion for Putin, for Hitler, for all those things. Of course, we don't wish more horrendous things to happen in the world. We just wish peace. But we also have to see that everything is happening in the world. The wars, the conflicts. It's the reflection of what's going on inside, because we have so much conflict and wars and problems and disgust and fear and anxiety and resentment and hatred and all this toxicity within us, all this negativity within us that we project to the world collectively. Imagine so many people, 8 billion people, we project our toxicity to the world collectively. We contribute positively and negatively. That's why we have to choose what we contribute to. Do we want to contribute in a positive way or in a negative way? I mean, of course, we should keep our compassion and love and empathy for every being, but it doesn't mean that we should justify all the horrendous things. No. Although they did some help, those people, those tough characters, as it is called it here. But maybe it's time for us to think that maybe what's going on, I mean, all those tough characters, what they are doing is maybe our projections. Maybe they are just the, what's the thing? Maybe they are just the channel. Maybe their body is the channel of our collective toxicity that's working, that is manifesting. And maybe they are the victim of our projection that is happening in the world. Maybe they are the victim that are evil doing, like evil projections, evil thoughts that is manifested from. And of course, their body is also maybe volunteered for that. Yeah, like there are so many ways to think. Anyway, I'll keep reading. There's one very tough character you'll have to work with before you can go any further with this practice yourself. Wow. Yeah, we are the tough character, yourself. For some of us, it may be harder to master compassion for ourselves than for others. It's true. That's why we must master ourselves. We must have compassion and empathy for ourselves before others. There is a saying attributed to the Buddha. You can search throughout the entire universe for someone who's more deserving of your love and compassion than you are yourself. And that person is not to be found anywhere. You yourself, as much as anybody, deserve your love and compassion. It's beautiful. That's why I spend my time loving myself right now. And you know what? I love my mom more than years before that. And she's so happy, and because I send my positivity all the time to her. And really, people feel our spirits, our soul. Humans, way before the meat suit, we are soul beings, we are soulful beings. So the positivity that I send her give her life. That's why energy is so important. That's why we need to lower ourselves first, have compassion and empathy for ourselves first. Only then we can lower others. Important terms. Compassion, the desire to alleviate suffering. Pity, feeling sorry for someone who has to endure suffering. Questions to consider. Recall a time when you were the recipient of another's compassion. What effects did not experience have on your state of mind? Do you accept the idea that compassion is an inherent part of who we are? Why or why not? Either way, compassion needs cultivation. That's beautiful. And I really hope that everyone, all of us, have a compassion, cultivate compassion, foster the habit of compassion and empathy for one another, for each other, for the world, for every members of the planet Earth. And only then we will contribute to the positivity and refrain contributing negativity in the world. That's my ultimate wish. Contributing positivity all the time.